Okay, so we're gonna let me read for us out of Daniel chapter 7. We'll just read verses 15 through 20 and pick it up there, and we'll start with just a little review from page 6. Okay, so Daniel chapter 7, verse 15. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are four kings which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely, that horn which had eyes and a mouth, which spoke pompous words. There's where you can get this thought about blaspheming right there, which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. So if we look in the handout, just a little review to kind of get us kind of like when you're kind of all running together for where we've been, kind of thoughts. On page 6, and on the bottom of the underneath the picture, which comes from the NIV Study Bible, Daniel mentions 10 horns in this chapter 3 times. Book of Revelation mentions 10 horns 6 times. And then Daniel mentions another horn 10 times, and they're going to be on page 8. We're just kind of running through this now. Who are the 10 horns? Just real overview. There's 2 ways of looking at it. One is that there's 10 specific nations, and the other is that they are like coalitions of governments, like maybe the North Atlantic, Europe, and that would be 2. That kind of thing, coalitions. So that's a possibility. I'm over on page 7 near the bottom. Daniel 7:24 says that there'll be 3 nations which are distinct from those 10 horns. Okay, so those 3 nations or kingdoms then are going to be subdued. Notice Daniel 7:24. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them, and shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. Going over to the next page. This mainly just kind of review, kind of getting us moving forward. On page 8, there's 10 horns. Aside from the 10 horns, there is an 11th horn. And you can see I identify them all for you on this page with the red bold font. The only one that's missing from this is Daniel 7:24. It's not on page 8, but I just read it to you from page 7. So there are 10 times where this 11th horn is mentioned. Okay, it is fair to say that some of the references to the 11th horn refer to the Antichrist. In fact, I don't know of anybody of our ilk of faith that would not say that there is some kind of an evil person coming in the last days who is this 11th horn. I don't know of anybody who would say that in our ilk of faith. Okay? But it is also obvious historically that 11th horn also does seem to fit Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes, and all of the same group of people that I just described, they would also say this. Antiochus Epiphanes. Who is he? He's the bad guy in the story of Hanukkah with the book of Maccabees. And so, and the Lord said, the bottom of page 8, he said in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Well, the Lord lived 2 centuries after. He walked the earth 2 centuries after Antiochus Epiphanes. after Daniel lived. So you've got this thing that happens with Daniel. Daniel lives at like 500 BC, and Antiochus Epiphanes lives like he does his sinning stuff 167, 165 BC. And clearly the Lord is saying whatever Daniel was saying about Antiochus Epiphanes is going to be in the future, but yet it already happened. It's a lot like as we would see Elijah. The scripture says that right at the end of Malachi in the Old Testament, God's going to send the prophet Elijah before the coming of the Lord. And in Mark chapter 9 and the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus is asked about John the Baptist, is this Elijah? And Jesus says, yes, but Elijah's going to come. So, in other words, John the Baptist was a prefiguring person of the coming of Elijah who comes before the second coming of Jesus. So it's a lot like that with Antiochus Epiphanes and with the Antichrist. Very similar. So on page 9, and this will start to be new now, but all that was kind of needed to just kind of help us get going. All right? So in Daniel chapter 9, verse 20, it says that there is this other horn, and he has eyes and a mouth which speak pompous words. So the fact that the other horn, that it is the other horn, tells us that the other horn is somehow distinct from the 10 horns. He's not the same as the 10. Okay? This beast has eyes and a mouth, and both of those are symbols of human desire. Eyes and a mouth. In other words, it looks like a person, okay, because it has this as eyes and a mouth which speak pompous words. So he looks something like a person. The other beasts are kingdoms of men that look like animals. This is something else that looks like a person. You see how that just flipped? He has eyes and a mouth like a man. So there's something else which is not a man. The others are men that look like animals. This is more like, it's animal, if you will, spiritually demonic, but it looks like a man. When I think about the mouth and the eyes, and I imagine I'm not the only person who's going to think of this, I'm thinking of 1 John 2:16, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. And I'm thinking of Eve, who looks at the tree and she sees that it looks good for food to eat. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and desires it because it will make us wise like God. That's the pride of life. So you can just see the connections here. All right. Okay, so notice that its eyes are described like the eyes of a man. So it has these. Okay, so like yesterday, we like to do Mother's Day. Pray for Donna because the reason she's not here. She still doesn't feel good. She just feels sick. But for Mother's Day, we don't like to go out on Mother's Day. It's just a hard day to go to a restaurant, you know. So we always make it a point to go sometime the week before, so I don't look like I'm trying to make up for what I forgot. So we went yesterday to a restaurant, and I thought I'm going to get a big steak, so I ordered a big steak. I won't tell you how big; you'll think I'm a pig, and they're not kosher. And so I ordered this big steak, and then the waitress says, "Would you like mushrooms and onions on it? Or jalapenos?" I said, "Yeah, let's do it. I'd never do that. Let's do it." I had no idea how thick all that would be. It was a massive steak, massive amount of food, and I never leave it. So I just ate it all. I active worship, and I'm still feeling it. It was delicious. But the old saying about he has eyes that are bigger than his stomach. And I did it. And I wasn't thinking about this class or example at all. I just did it. Never even occurred to me till I looked at my notes here. But I'm still feeling full. Okay, so in Daniel 7:20, it has 10 horns that are on its head, and the other horn which comes up before which 3 fall. Okay, so once again, we see in Daniel 7:8 and in Daniel 7:20, it mentions that these 3 horns fall prey to the 11th horn. So there's a lot of question now about who are these 3 horns. Okay, so they clearly could represent the 3 beasts, the other 3 beasts, Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, and Greece.
This is just how my mind works. I read this and I see, I'm looking at the movie screen going on in my head, and I see the 3 horns bowing down in worship, like falling in worship. That's probably not the word.
Well, I don't think that's. I'd be surprised if that were the Aramaic word, but the picture is more about them being subdued, more about them being, So Daniel 7:8 and 20 could be saying that there are these 3 other beasts, 3 other nations, 3 other kingdoms that fall before the one, and that the 3 are not part of the 10. Or it could be saying that the 3 are part of the 10 and they come down. Jack Van Impe used to say that there were 10, it would go to 13, it would come back to 10. Those are all possibilities. The more, even since I wrote this, I lean more and more into thinking that all this is saying is exactly the same thing that Revelation 13:2 is saying. Now, the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and the leopard's mentioned in Daniel 7:6. His feet were like the feet of a bear, which is mentioned in Daniel 7:5, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion, which is mentioned in Daniel 7:4. So the 3 previous beasts. That's really it just looks like that could be it. And the dragon gave him his power. So Satan gives the little horn, the Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes. Satan gives this person his power. So it is, as it were, a demonic presence that looks like a man, rather than the other 3 beasts, which are people, and they look like animals. Does that make sense? Okay, so going over to page 10. We've seen that the lion represents Babylon. The bear represents the Medes and the Persians. This is all in that picture that was on the page 6. Okay, and Daniel 7:20 may simply be saying that the revived Roman Empire is going to have all of the strengths of these 3 previous kingdoms. But of course, it could mean that the 11th horn, the Antichrist, will completely absorb 3 of the 10 horns. It could mean that. Okay, so Daniel 7:21, I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. Okay, so according to Daniel 9:27, the Antichrist is going to break a treaty with Israel in the middle of the tribulation period. At that time, he's going to begin to wage war against Jewish saints. I believe it's talking about Jewish saints. Dr. Boyd Luter from TKU believes it's talking about church saints, but I believe it's all saints. Okay, but we usually think about saints. The word must firstly refer to Jews during the tribulation because they're here. All right. And notice Daniel 9:27. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. And in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall be the one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Okay, this word for week, you can see on the right side, is the Hebrew word Shavua. It could be any period of 7. 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 years. That's just all the word means. A period of 7. So there's going to be this set period of 7, and the war of the saints against the saints is going to start in the middle of this 70th week that we're going to see when we get to Daniel 9. But there'll be this 70th week. There'll be this period of 7, and we look back on it. It really works to make it 7 years. These periods are years. Like each block of the 70 is 7 years. So, and we'll see that when we get there. But in the middle of that 7 last week, he makes war against the saints. I think that it seems obvious to me. There is going to be this covenant with many for 1 week. What's the word covenant? It's essentially a treaty. Right? Brie. It's essentially a treaty with many. It's not a treaty with 2. It's not a treaty between God and Israel. It's not a treaty between the Antichrist and Israel. It's a treaty with many nations. So what we're looking at here then is there has got to be some kind of a political arrangement in the world so that there can be a treaty, a multinational treaty involving many nations in the last days. And one of those nations must be Israel. Does that make sense? So the reason why I find this just so significant, and I think, and the people in this room will be quick to, if you haven't already seen it, to see it. Okay? Jesus said, the poor you'll always have with you. There will be people who are poor up on the planet until the day that the Lord comes and sets up his kingdom. There will be people who are starving until the day that the Lord sets up his kingdom. There will be issues with marriage until the day that the Lord sets up his kingdom. There will be issues with every kind of sin and horrible thing that you could imagine until that day when Jesus comes. Therefore, none of those things can be the key to the return of the Lord. There is one issue that is directly tied. It is the only issue that is directly tied to the timing of the coming of Jesus. There must be, in God's eyes, maybe not in our eyes at all, we might have 180 degrees backwards. In God's eyes, the political landscape surrounding the one nation of Israel must be such that it sets up the platform for the Lord to return. The political condition of Israel is the singular issue. Nothing else gets 87th place. It's the singular issue that is tied to the return of Jesus. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you will not see me again until you, Jerusalem, say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That is the only issue. Doesn't matter what happens to the USA. Doesn't matter what happens to Russia. Doesn't matter what happens to Ukraine. None of those are tied to the return of Jesus. Israel, that covenant. So God has to manipulate the circumstances of the politics of the world in order to create a situation that will involve Israel in some way that fits his plan so that when he comes back, it's like tied to it. Do you see the point there? That's the issue right there. That is the issue. There is a treaty. It involves many nations. It's a 7-year treaty. In the middle of that 7 years, 3.5 years into it, things are just going to, he who was building a treaty for Israel is now going to turn against Israel. And that is tied to the return of Jesus. Is that clear? Jeremiah 30, verse 7. I used that in the sermon of the last Shabbat service. Alas, for that day is great, that none shall be like it, and it is the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Now that verse plainly tells us Israel will be saved out of a time of trouble. Romans 11, verse 12. All Israel shall be saved. No other nation gets that promise. So we shouldn't be surprised that Israel is going to be connected with spiritual warfare, because if God put his finger on that nation, then Satan puts his finger on that nation. So Israel is the center of all spiritual warfare in the last days. And we're told, the only nation that's told us, all of your people will be saved, but they're going to be saved out of a time of trouble. Now, consider Revelation 12:1. Okay, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and her head a garland of 12 stars. That woman, I believe, is just completely obviously about Israel. Everything else is an application, and in no way is it it. It is Israel. Why do I say that? Okay. Because Genesis 37 says, now he, Joseph, dreamed still another dream. And he told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he, Joseph, told it to his father Jacob. Jacob, whose name gets changed to Israel. He told it to Israel and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I, there is the sun and the moon. And your brothers, there's 11 stars, because he would be the 12th son. He would be the 12th star. Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So it's pretty obvious. And this is the only place in Scripture with something that clear. You got the sun, the moon, and the 12 stars, and it's Israel. Okay? I know, like, the Catholics want to make it Mary. That's an application. By the way, I found myself wondering the other day, since we now have a pope from Chicago, will there be drive-by shootings in the Vatican?
Deep dish pizza.
They will have deep. So, on page 11, Revelation 12:5. She bore a male child. So this woman, who's Israel, bears a male child. That's Jesus, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. That's Jesus, and the law will go out from Jerusalem. Right? And so there he is, ruling the world in the age to come. And her child is caught up to God in his throne. There's the ascension. Obviously, the male child is Jesus. Okay, we have any questions about that? Him ruling the world with an iron scepter? Revelation 19:15. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword with which he should strike the nations. And he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and the wrath of Almighty God. I don't see any way around it. Everything else becomes replacement theology. It's Israel, this woman. So Revelation 12, verse 12, therefore, you can make all kinds of very good applications. Applications are important, but they are applications. It is Israel. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, For the devil has come down to you with great wrath because he knows that he has a short time. Spiritual warfare here. It's around Israel. And when the dragon saw that he'd be cast to the earth, he persecuted who? The woman, Israel, who gives birth to the male child. Spiritual warfare. So the Antichrist is going to become a full-blown anti-Semite. And then that raises the question, when does the Antichrist wage war against the Jewish saints? So I did a little of this last time, but I'm going to do it a little bit more. Keep going, because I think it just helps to fit it all together. And it doesn't hurt to hear it again, frankly. Okay, so if we take 7 years, half of 7 years, we're looking for the middle point. By the way, nothing I'm saying in any way supports pre-trib over post-trib or post-trib over pre-trib or mid-trib or any of that. Nothing I'm saying has, if you think it does, you do not understand me. This does not support any one view or the other. Okay? It does support this idea that there is a 7-year period and that the middle of the year is important. Okay, so if you take 7 years, you cut it in half, you've got 3.5 years, which is 42 months. 12 plus 12 plus 12 is 36, and then add a half a year, 6, and you got 42 months. Okay, 42 months, 30 days apiece. That's 1,260 days to the day. Revelation 12:6. They should feed her there 1,260 days to a day, 3.5 years. In other words, this treaty is to a day going to be the day. In Zechariah 13:8, it shall come to pass in the land, says the Lord, that 2/3 in it shall be cut off and die, 1/3 shall be left in it. And I will bring the 1/3 through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. And I will say, this is my people, and each one will say, the Lord is my God. Page 12. So I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. Okay, so the word saints in Daniel 7:21 may refer first of all to Jews of the tribulation, but it may not necessarily refer exclusively to Jews. Okay, Dr. Luter will say it refers to the Christian saints. I'm saying it's more likely going to include the Jews, but both saints. And I showed you that probably a month ago now, that the word saints, and it's in this handout, refers to more than, it even includes angels. You saw that. Okay, so here's Revelation 7. The first 8 verses of Revelation 7, I guess I have a typo there, not Revelation 8. The first 8 verses of Revelation 7 describe 144,000 Jewish saints in the last days. After these things I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth. And the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. Before I go on, let me just point out something that I always do when I'm doing a read through the Bible. I always, in my Bible, I will put down the number. So, Judah is the 4th born, so I would put a 4 there. And Reuben is the firstborn, so I would put a 1 there. You see what I'm saying? And I'm just going back and forth between Genesis 29 and 30 and wherever it is, to make sure I get the order. I'm always interested in how God, what he does, and I have never been able to find any kind of, obviously God's putting them in the order he wants, obviously, but I've never been able to figure out what it is. And it will vary throughout Scripture. He'll have them in different order all over the place. Now, Dan is not in there. And that's an interesting question. So why is Dan not in there? Okay, well, first of all, we don't know. Okay? And the reason why we can just say that is, and there are people like Jerry Falwell who said that means the Antichrist is going to come out of Dan. Okay? That's kind of bothersome to say that. Okay? I don't have a problem with saying that you've got the Antichrist and the false prophet. One's a Jew and one's a Gentile, and you're identifying both there. Okay? But why? I don't think that the Antichrist is going to be Jewish. I think it'll be the false prophet. I've explained this why. You all heard that, right? Okay? And the reason why it's going to be the false prophet and not the Antichrist is because the false prophet is a religious figure, and he looks like a lamb in Revelation. So he's going to try to look like Jesus, a religious figure, whereas the Antichrist is a political figure. So a Jew and Gentile together. Why is Dan not mentioned? We don't know. But for example, we could go to Deuteronomy 33, where Moses is prophesying about all of the tribes, and the tribe of Simeon is not mentioned. So there are multiple places in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, where one tribe or another is not mentioned. So we don't know why Dan is not mentioned. Everything's just a guess. I do think that as John Walvoord, probably the leading Baptist eschatology preacher, said, it would be, I saw that hand, but just hold on for just a second. It would be rather ridiculous, he wrote, to carry the typology of Israel representing the church to the extent of dividing them up into 12 tribes, as was done here, if the intent of the writer was to describe the church. And he'll actually go so far in that book as to say that there's not a single reference in the Bible which will use the word Israel to mean the church. There is one out of the 46 times between Acts and Revelation. In the Greek, the word Israel, Israelite, or Israelites, those three words, will appear 46 times between Acts and Revelation. And of the 46, Galatians 6:16 is the only place where you could make it mean the church. But it evidently doesn't. And I actually take my TKU class, and I have the class is an hour and 15 minutes. I have a lot more time there than I do here. But on the slides, I actually put up every single one of those 46 times. And I asked them the question, is it even possible that the word Israel, because it would show up somewhere between Acts and Revelation, is it even possible that the word Israel could possibly mean the church? And of the 46 times in 45, it is completely impossible. Okay, on the 46th time, Galatians 6:16, right at the end of Galatians, Paul says, he says, peace be upon all who believe like this. He says, even upon the Israel of God. So there are people who say, well, that's the church. I don't think so. Because Paul is being very sarcastic throughout the entire book of Galatians. And probably one really good verse to make the point is Galatians 5:12. And he is just tearing at people who are insisting that Gentiles be circumcised. And he'll actually say this, I wish they would go the whole way. I'll quote the Message translation. I wish they'd go the whole way and emasculate themselves. Paul is being, I just wish they'd go ahead and castrate themselves. Okay, that's Paul's attitude. You foolish Galatians. You idiots. That's Paul in the letter. So when he gets to the end of the book in Galatians 6:16, peace be upon all who have this, even those crazy Israelites. Not the church. There's not a single place in the New Testament, from Acts to Revelation. I don't do this with the Gospels because the word Israel there is going to be, what do you do with it? Because it's like, the Gospels are really Old Testament until you get to the cross. Right? They really are. They're Old Testament until you get to the cross. So the idea that Israel has been replaced is absurd. And Walvoord's point is it would just be absurd to list them out like this if he didn't mean Israel. And you don't have Ephraim mentioned, but you have Joseph mentioned in verse 8. And you have Manasseh mentioned in verse 6. So Manasseh is one of the two sons of Joseph. So it mentions one but not the other. It doesn't mention Ephraim. But it doesn't mention Dan. So we don't know, but he's clearly talking about Israel. So and you had a question. Is it Kyle? Is that right?
12 still.
And actually, it's hard to really go all the way with this question because, like when you start adding up the tribes, if you include Levi because they are a tribe, then you got 13. All right. So the whole story of how many tribes there are, but the Levites are typically not counted among the 12. Why? Because they don't get land. So it's really it's a complicated thing, but it's clearly he's referring to Israel. All right. So Revelation 7 verses 1 through 8 are clearly talking about Israel. Okay. Then you come to verse 9. The second half there's that same typo. The second half of Revelation 7 describes the Gentiles, people from all the nations, not Israel. Okay? So the word nations is in Revelation 7:9 is the word ethnos. We get our English word ethnic from it. So the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. The New Testament is written in Greek. So when the Old Testament was translated into the Greek, creating the Septuagint about the 2nd century BC, so this was the primary Bible that Jesus used when he walked the earth, and all of the apostles, you can tell by all the quotes that they're using throughout the entire New Testament. They're like, I think it's 85%, something like that, of the New Testament quotes from the Old Testament are from the Septuagint, from the Greek Bible. So you have all of these Greek verses. Well, when the Old Testament was translated into the New Testament, into the Greek, what word did they use for goyim? The word in the Hebrew Bible for Gentiles, goyim, plural, goy, singular. What word did they use? Since you can't use the Hebrew word in the Greek New Testament, what word did they use? They used the word ethnos. So when you see the word ethnos in the New Testament, it basically means the same thing as goyim in the Old Testament, Gentiles. Does that make sense? Okay, so with that in mind, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number of all the goyim, of all the Gentiles, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands. Palm branches were essentially the flag of Israel. That's why on Palm Sunday, they were waving palm branches when Jesus was riding into Jerusalem. And that's why the Pharisees said to Jesus, stop your disciples from doing this, or the Romans are going to come and kill us all. It's like waving the American flag. That's literally the palm branch. That's what was happening here. So So they're standing before the throne with palm branches in their hands, crying out with a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." All the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the four living creatures fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, "Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor, power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, "Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from?" And I, John the Apostle said, Sir, you know." So he said to him, "These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they're before the throne of God and serve him day and night in the temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. And they shall neither hunger any more nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them with any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water. And God," notice this is interesting, "God will," future tense, "wipe away every tear from their eyes." The idea that there are no tears in heaven is just not true. Just not true. There is coming a new heaven and a new earth, because the angel is clearly saying to John the Apostle, "You see these people? They have tears in their eyes, and God will wipe away their tears." So there's tears in heaven. Twice you'll find that in the book of Revelation. And it will both times be a future tense. He will. Now, Hebrews 8 verse 7 says the fact that there is a new covenant shows that fault can be found with the old covenant. We got to have the new covenant must be better than the old covenant, right? Hebrews 8 verse 7. Okay? Well, if you have a new heaven and a new earth, then the new heaven must be better than the current heaven. There will be no tears in the new heaven. Does it make sense? Okay, so Zechariah 8:23. "Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days 10 men from every language of the Goyim," the Gentiles, "shall grasp the sleeve of a Jewish man and say, 'Let us go with you, for we've heard that God is with you.'" So what you have in Zechariah 8:23 is this picture of Gentiles coming to faith in Yeshua because of the witness of the Jewish people. So what you have in Revelation, chapter 7, not chapter 8, is the first 8 verses are all a picture of 144,000 Jewish Billy Grahams running around the world telling the world about Jesus. And Gentiles are receiving. That's what's happening there. In Revelation 14, I don't have the verse, I don't think I pulled up the verse, but in Revelation 14, it will actually describe these 144,000 again, and it will say that they know a song that no one else can learn. So this is the 144,000 Jewish Billy Grahams. Every one of them is Jewish. And they are preaching the gospel like God always wanted Israel to do, which is proclaiming him as Messiah. And that is what's going to happen in the age to come, in our age, before the age to come. This is how this age will close out. Okay, so Daniel 7, verse 22, "Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and a time came for the saints to possess the kingdom." In the old King James, it says, "Judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom." So judgment is made in favor of the saints. Art Scroll, Orthodox Jewish, translates this, it was granted the Holy One's vengeance. The saints are going to be delivered from the hands of the Antichrist. In other words, judgment is given for the saints. And they are going to be placed in authority. Psalms 37, verse 11. "But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace." There's only 2 people that the Bible actually calls meek in the Bible. Moses in Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. They're the only two people the Bible actually calls meek. The Greek word for meek is prautes, Praotes, I think. So prautes, it actually, we think it has some connection to the word weak because it rhymes. It has no connection to the word weak. It just rhymes. It actually means power under control. That's the meek. So the only two people that the Bible calls meek are the two most powerful people of the Bible. So Jesus in Matthew 11:29 says, "Don't you think I could call for 12 legions of angels?" He said, "But learn from me. I am meek and lowly. I've got my power under control." And Moses is called meek in Numbers 12, verse 3, when in the first two verses of the chapter, Miriam and Aaron are gossiping about Moses because he had married an Ethiopian woman. And Moses does nothing about it. He could have done something about it. Because in Numbers 16, 4 chapters later, when Korah led a rebellion, Moses basically says to Korah and those in rebellion, look, if God didn't send me, then you'll die a normal death. But if he did, tomorrow the ground will open up and you'll fall alive into the Sheol. And tomorrow the ground opened up and they went alive into Sheol. So Moses could have responded in Numbers 12 to Miriam and Aaron, but he didn't. And when he didn't, that's when God showed up and he says to Miriam and Aaron, "Why were you not afraid to talk about Moses like this? Don't you know he is the meekest man on the planet?" The only two people called meek. And they inherit the earth. So let me see we covered the rest of this all the way up to. We covered everything to the page 17. Let me just, maybe I'll just say a few more words about meek and then we'll just stop. We'll pick it up on verse 17. Or should I just, I'm going to do a little bit more. I just love this stuff. We got time. Please.
144 is that only that group? Yeah, because some say it might be all the remaining Messianic Jews, but no, you seem to, it's not limited because there will be additional Messianic Jews being saved as well.
144 are 144,000 people. People get saved. Lots of people get saved. Absolutely, and that's the point of Revelation. You'll have 144,000, they're called virgins, 140 in Numbers 14, 144,000 Jewish Billy Grahams, Spirit-filled, running around the planet, preaching Jesus. Okay, others will talk about Jesus too. Other Jews, other Gentiles will talk about Jesus. But these 144,000 are going to have this massive harvest, and that's the nations of the second half of Revelation chapter 7.
Or on an earthly Mount Zion, or some say it might be a heavenly Mount Zion.
I don't know. I'd have to look at it a little bit more carefully. Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Question I have. So is there any significance in why the Church of All Nations is in the Garden of Gethsemane? Do you know?
Because the Catholic Church called it the Church of All Nations. That's why it's there. And there's a church there, and we can understand why somebody would put a church there, right? And that's what they called it.
But when you said about the 12 tribes, like I know that Judah didn't get land, but they are counting.
Levi didn't get land. Judah did.
But they are counted on the 12.
So there's different places, like Levi is one of the tribes, but they don't get land. So typically when the Bible talks about the 12 tribes, it won't include the Levites because they don't get land. But there really are. If you count Joseph, then there's 12. If you count Joseph's two kin, kids, then you have Manasseh and Ephraim, then you really have 13 tribes. But one of them doesn't get land, and that's why it gets confusing. Okay. All right, let's go over to page 17, because we did all that stuff last time. You're going to love the video next time, because the video is going to be a rabbi, non-messianic rabbi, explaining all that stuff and more. Okay, so that was between where we just left up to page 17. On page 17, chapter 7, verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. Okay, historical Rome used brute force to conquer the world, but it did not devour the whole earth. And the Antichrist is going to use peace at first, but his peace is really going to be a Trojan horse, and he is eventually going to crush his opposition. In the next chapter, in Daniel 8, it says, through his cunning he shall cause deceit, in other words, lies, to prosper under his rule. And he shall exalt himself in his heart, and he shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the Prince of Princes, the Lord, but he shall be broken without human means. God will do the breaking. Daniel 8, verse 25, and through his policy he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace he shall destroy many. That's Old King James. NIV, when they feel secure, he will destroy many. Okay, how will he use peace to conquer and destroy? This is why I wanted to go just a little bit longer. Okay, Daniel 9, verse 27. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. There's that 7-year period referred to. And in the middle of the week, he brings an end to the sacrifice and offering. Okay. This whole picture seems to also connect with what we see in Revelation 6, verse 2. And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, that's like bow and arrow, okay? And a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. This word for crown is the word Stephanos, okay, from which we get the English name Stephen. Okay, I'm sure it's more than English, right? Because it's in Acts 6, the first deacon. Okay, but that word right there, crown, is the word Stephanos. It's different. So that's like a wreath that a victor in a game would be given. It's different from the word that is the kind of crown that royalty wears. Okay, we're talking New Testament Greek. Okay, Stephanos is what is that word there in Revelation 6. But a king would have the Greek word diadema. Okay, diadem. Bring forth the royal diadem. The diadem is a crown of royalty. In Revelation 19:12, his eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head he has many diadem. Not Stephanos. So the Antichrist, Revelation 6, has a Stephanos, a victor's crown that he goes out to conquer, but Jesus has a royal diadem, actually many of them. And I thought it's page 19 that I really just wanted to do with you, because I just think this is just fascinating stuff. Okay, so in Revelation 5, John weeps because nobody's worthy to open the scroll, right? To open the seals. And the seals are all judgments, but the judgments are necessary because they have to preclude the coming of Jesus to the earth. Okay, he's got to use a metaphor, he's got to pour salt on the pollution to clean it up. Okay, and so so John weeps because nobody's worthy to open the scroll, to loose the seals. Okay, but 24 elders begin to sing out about how you are worthy to open the scrolls. That's all in Revelation 5. So let's just go down the left and the right, because the order is remarkably identical. And that's what's so interesting. The order is exactly the same. In Revelation 6, I saw a lamb opened one of the seals, and I saw the four living creatures saying with a voice, I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering to conquer. So a lot of prophecy people will point out he has a bow, but it doesn't mention any arrows. So he's conquering on a white horse. It's like a picture of peace. He's going out looking like a man of peace. See that? But he's not, he's going out to conquer, but he's looking like a man of peace. Okay? I'm just going to go down the left all the way, and then we'll go down the right. Okay? The second seal. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come and see." And another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. I will suggest that Ezekiel 38 and 39, those two chapters are about a last days war. Ezekiel 38 and 39. Ezekiel 39, verse 9, says that after that war of Ezekiel 38 and 39, Ezekiel 39:9 says that Israel will take 7 years to gather the weapons up and burn them for fuel following that war. So that nails that war down as being right at the beginning of that 7-year tribulation period. It's got to be like the opening day. So there's a war at the very first day of the 7 years. The Antichrist is siding with Israel on the white horse, looking like a man of peace. But there is a war going on, Ezekiel 38 and 39, and it ends, I'm repeating the verse so you can look at it later, in 39:9, it just says that they're going, Ezekiel 39:9, they're going to burn these weapons for fuel for 7 years. So this war has to start at the beginning of the 7-year period. So this war that happens at the beginning makes a way for the Antichrist to look like a man of peace. Does that make sense? The next thing that happens, the third seal. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse. And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard the voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarii." That's a day's wages for enough bread for a person to eat. You'll work all day long for the bread you need just to be able to survive. One person's survival. 3 quarts of barley for a denarii. And do not harm. In other words, don't touch. You can't afford the oil and the wine. You got no way to cook it. So the picture here is this famine. And the famine is going to follow the war. You can imagine the picture. Okay. Then we come to the fourth seal. And he opened the fourth seal, and I heard the 4 living creatures saying, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. The word is chloros, the Greek word, and it's the color. It's a light green, like if you were to leave something on your lawn, and then you left it there for several days, maybe a week, and then you moved it, and the grass would be a light green. That's the color, like this deathly dying green color. And the name of him who sat on the horse was Death, and Hades, hell, was following with him. So most of the people who are dying are not going to heaven. And power was given to over a fourth of the earth. So if there's 8 billion people on the planet, then this would be 1/4 of 8 billion, or 2 billion people would die from this one horse. There are 21 judgments in the book of Revelation. 2 billion will die from this one. Isn't that interesting? You see what these days are like? And what it says, over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and with the beast of the earth. Okay, so let me put this in context. The sword is a war. That's the same as the war horse, the second seal. The hunger is like the black horse of famine. And death, they're dying. So in other words, you've got 4 horses of the apocalypse, and here's how I would describe them. It's like the gate opens at a race, and the 4 horses rush out at the same time. Clearly, the second horse is happening, the war, the red horse, at the same time as the white horse. Well, the 4th horse is happening, and the 4th horse is killing people from the same stuff that the first and the second horse were killing people from, and the 3rd horse. In other words, they're all being released right away. This is how that 7-year period starts. All 4 horses are released simultaneously, which is why the 5th horse will sound complete. The 5th judgment is not a horse. It's a different kind of seal. The first of the 7 seals, 4 are horses, and the last 3 are not. The first 4 rush out of the gate at once. The 5th one does not. Does that make sense? Okay, so what's the 5th one? The cry of the martyrs. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar of the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. They cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge the earth, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until the number of the fellow servants and their brethren who were killed as they were should be completed. So martyrdom. So the picture is 4 horses rush out, then there's got to be some kind of a break in time, enough for people to start to get saved. And people are starting to get saved, and that's where the martyrdom comes in. Okay? Go over to the right now. Matthew. Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ. This is Antichrist. This is the one on the white horse. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. There's the red horse. And there'll be famines. There's the black horse. And pestilences and earthquakes. There's the disease, the wild beasts of the earth. And then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. There's the martyrdom. They're exactly the same order. You see that there? This is nothing about this as pre-trib, nothing about this as mid-trib, nothing about this as pre-wrath, and nothing about this as post-trib. None of that has any application to anything that I'm saying. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying they're irrelevant. Okay? Might be right, might be wrong. They're irrelevant. They cannot be drawn out of these passages. But then notice verse 13 and 14. But he who endures to the end shall be saved, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, to all the ethnos, to all the goyim, if you will, and then the end will come. Not then the rapture will come. Then the end will come. Maybe it means the rapture, but it doesn't say rapture, does it? Then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, oh, there's Daniel. That's why we did this. Then you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place. Whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So that, we're going to pick it up with page, I would love to go longer, but I got to stop. I just got to. But we'll pick it up with page, because it really does fit well to keep going to the top of 21, but we're not going to do it. So we'll pick it up with page 20.